Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the upbeat intro music. I decided I wanted to have two intros for the podcast. One that's kind of spooky and mysterious when we're covering odd or bizarre topics, and one that's a little more uplifting and spiritual when we're talking about things that are light and positive and has to do with our spirituality. If you're listening to this podcast on one of the video platforms, you may be saying, hey, what intro? Well, you have to go to anchor.com and listen to it because, on some video platforms, we are not allowed to share or have any kind of music in our podcast or videos that is copyrighted. So, sorry, had to edit it out. Anyhow, I wanted to talk to you today about something I was just thinking about, and I really wanted to just, on the fly, fire up my recording tools here and do a podcast about it. And, folks, there's a lot in our world that many of us are afraid of. Some people are afraid of death, sickness, disease, dying, loss, being homeless, losing our job, losing our home. We're afraid of other people. We're afraid of governments or certain political parties, right down to some religious people and spiritual people who are afraid always of, the devil, the demons, the darkness in the world, always on the lookout for, what the enemy is doing. But is any of this really the way that we should live? Is there something that we're missing in our religions or even in the teachings of Christ that we're just not living in that place of peace and confidence and faith that we should? You hear me talk a lot about metaphysics on the podcast because metaphysics is something that I discovered probably about 20, 21 years ago. And it really struck me as true. It was just one of those things that made me sit up and go, hey, I always really believed that and felt that in my own heart. And I didn't know it was a thing that other people believed in it too and wrote books about it and done great studies about it and even made a spiritual or metaphysical science out of. And the thing in metaphysics that really struck me is that they say God is the only power in the universe. God is the only truth. God is the only law. There is no power or creative power besides God. Metaphysicians look at the world of matter and they say all of the problems that we have in our world and in our lives is simply due to the wrong thoughts and perceptions that we have about life and the universe. And I always find it fascinating that even our natural science and quantum physics now tells us that this world we live in is more like a simulation. A solid isn't really a solid. It's particles and energy and waves. And that none of this is really real. So we are, in a sense, kind of living in an illusion. And we hear a lot of people say that now. This is the Matrix. This is an illusion. None of this is real. Well, they're kind of onto something there. But quantum physics also tells us that you can't have the universe without a conscious observer. And as they say, they look at certain particles, under their, super-powered microscopes, and it looks different to everybody. It kind of takes on the form of what the person looking at it thinks that it is. So does that trickle down to our reality here in this world? The way we perceive it is the way it is. And this is why we see some people who are so peaceful. They have so much faith. They seem like they're blessed and nothing ever bad happens to them. If life does throw them a curveball, they don't panic. They just, give a smile and, oh, well, this too shall pass. And it does. And we look at those people and we go, man, I want to be like that. How come I can't do that? Well, maybe it's based on our perception. And metaphysics tells us that it is. And all these fears and sickness and disease and sufferings that we see in the material world around us are nothing more than the erroneous, wrong thoughts of man's mortal mind, not his higher spiritual mind, perceiving these things in his world around him and having more faith and confidence in this world of matter than in the world of spirit, which is greater. Many metaphysicians point to the life of Jesus and they say, look what he did. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He even calmed the storm at sea. What did he say when he was on the boat sleeping and the wind and the waves came and the disciples were afraid and they woke him up and he said, where is your faith? Metaphysicians look at Jesus when he said, look at the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. They don't toil, they don't spin, they don't worry, they don't work, yet God provides for them. But look at you, ye of little faith, how you worry about all these things, what we will eat, what we will drink, what we will wear. There's never any record of Jesus ever being sick. We never read that one day in Capernaum, Jesus was laid up in one of his followers' homes with the flu or a head cold or, thyroid cancer or, some disease. It just didn't happen. And he's very unique that way because if we look at Buddha, whom I enjoy the teachings of Buddha, Buddha said when he became old, he had physical afflictions. He was very uncomfortable. He was in pain, and he ended up passing away. We look at Muhammad, who wrote the Quran, and he was poisoned by someone, and this poison ravaged his body, and he was sick. He was in pain. He suffered because of this poison that he ingested, and he eventually died of the effects of the poison. But now Jesus was very different. He was very unique. And metaphysicians look at that and say there was nothing that he encountered that he didn't overcome. He didn't walk through life saying to his followers, oh my God, what are we going to eat? And oh my God, winter's coming. Maybe we shouldn't be out here in the field talking because we're going to catch cold or we're going to get flu or that could lead to pneumonia. We were not vaccinated and inoculated, against all these damaging diseases that are around us. No, it said that he healed the most critical disease of the day, which was leprosy, and he had no problem touching a leper. And leprosy was very contagious. Yet Jesus laid his hands on the leper and said, be made clean, and his flesh was made clean. In our modern world, we're always afraid, don't eat this, don't eat that, make sure it's organic, make sure it's fat-free, don't eat sugar, don't eat white bread, don't eat this, don't eat that. This will make you sick, this will clog your arteries, this will give you the diabetes, this. Everything. We're even afraid of the food that we eat. Yet Christ said it's not what goes into the body that defiles a man because it goes through the digestive system and it's eliminated. But rather it's what comes out of the heart that defiles a man. And I was thinking about that earlier. We have someone eating a cookie. Is it the cookie that's going to harm the man, or the man's fear of the cookie that it's somehow going to harm him and make him sick and debilitate him if he eats it? So is it the cookie going in and going through the digestive system and being eliminated that's harmful to the man, or the man's faith or fear in that cookie or whatever food he's eating to do him harm? Again, there we have that perception of the universe, that perception of reality. We look at nature all around us, and nature is a beautiful thing. And in metaphysics, they say that whatever is beautiful and harmonious and peaceful in the universe is a reflection of the attributes of God. So when we look out of our window and we see the trees and the hills and the grass and the flowers and the sunshine, and all these beautiful things, the moon and the stars, we don't see the trees suffering with heart disease. We don't see the trees being afraid they're going to get cancer. We don't see the birds sitting on the branches of trees, talking about what worms or what bird seed they should eat because certain ones will cause them to die. No, there's not a lot of that happens in nature as far as illness and disease and destruction. And if there is, it's usually something that happens because of man's foolishness, bad decisions, and negligence, i.e. importing certain insects or that come over from, other countries, and somehow we think they're going to do good, and we put them out in our environment, and they start boring holes in trees and killing, there's all kind of things that man does to the environment. But the environment left alone, on its own, seems to do very well. Hence, again, the words of Christ. The birds of the field, or the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, they don't toil and spin and work to get what they need, yet they're taken care of. And how much more is man than a sparrow or a flower in the field? Here we are, these beings that have been given greater consciousness, greater spiritual consciousness, spiritual reflections of the divine force and creator of the universe. Yet we narrow our thinking down on these little things around us and convince ourselves that it's more real, more powerful than the divine spirit. We have more faith and confidence in the ability of catching the flu and becoming very sick and maybe even dying from it, depending on our age, than we do in the divine spirit to preserve us from having such an experience, or healing us rather quickly if we should come down with such an illness. We're just so afraid of everything. We're afraid of each other. We're afraid of demons and devils and, all that stuff I mentioned earlier. And that's when metaphysics looks and says, why do so many of us have such confidence and faith, or faith inverted, which is fear, in this material world to hurt us, but we have absolutely no faith in God to help us, to heal us, to preserve us, to raise us up? And a lot of people say, why doesn't God do anything? Why does God let these bad things happen? Why is there suffering in this world? Well, as spiritual beings who are reflections of God, a metaphysician would say, God's done all he's going to do. God is forever and eternally and right now. Love, peace, the only power in the universe, the only truth in the universe, the sustainer, the provider, all things good. But you're the one who's turning your consciousness, your attention away from that fountain of good and putting all your faith, all your thoughts, all your confidence in those other things to hurt you. Hence again, when Christ was sleeping on the boat and the wind and the waves kicked up with a storm and his disciples woke him and said, "Don't you care that we're about to perish?" And he said, "Where is your faith?" We have it in the story when Jesus was walking across the water and they thought he was a ghost. And Peter said, "If it's you, tell me to come out of the boat and walk on the water with you." And he did. But then it said Peter looked around and he saw the wind and the waves and he began to sink. And when Jesus pulled him out, he said, "Why did you doubt?" See, those two stories, whether they be actual, whether you think they actually happened, or whether you think they're just parables that talk about our faith, our spiritual power, our spiritual perception and understanding, they both tell us the same story. Again, whether you think they were actual, literal, or allegorical, that are conveying a message to us. And what is that message? You can do anything if you have faith in the divine spirit, in the infinite spirit, because it's there to uphold you. It's there to provide for you. It's there to help you and heal you. You are one with it. You are its offspring, its reflection. You're not abandoned. But if you take your eyes off of that and start looking at the wind and the waves like Peter and become afraid, as the narrative says, then you begin to sink. What do you begin to sink in? Despair, depression, fear, anxiety. The water representing being engulfed by the things of this world surrounding you, and you feel hopeless. I can't fight against this. They're greater than I am. Or maybe, in some people's opinion, even greater than God. And so we're overcome by these things. But metaphysics tells us to get our eyes off of those things and get our eyes back on the divine, on the infinite. Ponder and affirm daily that God is the only power. God is the only truth. You are one with God. God is love. God is the only creating force in the universe. God is one. God is relationship. God is perfect. God is peace. God is all things good. Affirm these things and begin to look around and say, and affirm to yourself, these things in this seeming material world are not greater than God. They have no power. They have no principle. They have no law. In reality, they have no substance, even no reality, because it's all just a matrix, an illusion, a hologram, as some quantum physicists call it. See, and mentally and spiritually, you start to break down and reason with yourself that this world and all of its problems and its sufferings are not greater than God, and eventually you have that crossover in your own consciousness where God becomes more real, more powerful, and those other things begin to just fade away. They don't affect you like you used to. Then you become one of these people. Or things in your body start to heal. Things in your circumstances start to heal. And no matter what the world throws at you, you just kind of smile, nod, and you overcome it. And you seem so blessed. And everybody says, man, how do they do that? I want to be like that guy. I want to be like that lady. But that's how you become that kind of person. Because all metaphysical healing and enlightenment is subjective. It takes place in you, changing your own mind, changing your focus, your perspective. So you're not looking at the universe through the lens of saying, gee, all these things in this material world are against me, and there's so many ways I could die, and so many ways I could get sick, and so many things that could hurt me, and so many things that could make me end up living on the street, or whatever it might be. And you start looking toward God going, no, you know what? None of those things exist in God, in infinite spirit. And that is another one that is a metaphysical truth that metaphysicians practice. They meditate on it. They affirm it. None of these bad things exist in infinite spirit. God is love. There is no hate. There is no darkness. God is peace. There is no anxiety. There is no stress. There is no unrest. God is the provider, the creator. There is no lack. There is no stinginess or withholding good from anybody in the infinite spirit. So anything that we see in this world of matter is actually the opposite of what God is. But none of those things exist in God, but they exist in our mortal mind, our mortal perception. That's how we see the universe, and that's how it reflects back to our reality. But a metaphysician will tell you that is the ultimate illusion. That is the ultimate error. We have to turn our attention back toward God, how good, how grand, how giving, how loving. And there's no darkness or evil or lack or disease or death or any of that in divine spirit. And again, a metaphysician will look at the scriptures where it says, in God there is no darkness, no variable of turning. That God tempts no man with evil. See, these things are in there, but our theology, our isms, have gone through these holy books, and rather than focusing on the good and the power of God, they're always making excuses of why we need to suffer. Why do we suffer? Because sadly, some of these institutions and governments thrive on suffering, so of course they want people to suffer. But there's an awful lot between the pages of the Bible and even the Quran and other books that talk about those that believe in God and those who have faith are more than conquerors of the things of this world. That they will not grieve and they will not fear. That they will overcome, they will tread on the serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Greater is he that is in you, the Christ consciousness, than he that is in the world. See, all these things we tend to forget, and then when someone mentions them, we go, oh, that's pie in the sky. Well, that's heretical. Well, who says so? Who said so? See, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we have been tricked into putting all these other things before God and believing they have more power than God. And here we are on planet Earth with all these odds stacked against us, 1,000,000 ways to die, 1,000,000,000 ways to suffer, all these horrible atrocities just waiting to happen to us. And man, you never know. But here we are, we put God off way out there somewhere in some mysterious land or mysterious place. And though we believe in him, and yes, God is love. Oh, and all things are possible if you have faith, but it's pretty slim to impossible that he'll actually do anything for you, even if you do pray, even if you do have faith, even if you believe that he is good. Because after all, somehow God wants us to suffer. Again, a mystic or a metaphysician will point toward the life of Jesus and say, did he suffer? Was he poor? Was he broke? Was he hungry? Was he sick? No. He did his thing and preached his message. And there were some people that tried to end his life in the end, but then he showed back up to show that, look, even death is an illusion. I was dead, but I'm alive. And everything I did and do, you can do too. Where did we miss that message? Is there not also a scripture that says we have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind? I would challenge anybody listening to this podcast, look up the definition of those words, some synonyms of those words, and then research those. What is power? What is love? What is sound mind? What is fear that we don't have? We don't have a spirit of fear, but yet the world and theology and isms and the very limited thinking of man that puts all of his faith in this material world tells us, oh yeah, we should be afraid because, there's bad stuff everywhere. And then to some people, hey, there's bad stuff everywhere. And then we got the demons that are everywhere. Is it any wonder we have so many religions in the world today, but so many of them are void of power, void of the demonstrations of faith and goodness and love? And isn't it interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that anybody who does demonstrate those things, who does demonstrate and overcome the pitfalls and problems of this world, many look at and say they're evil. The devil's doing that for them. And isn't it doubly interesting that they said the same thing about Jesus himself? We need to shift our focus. We need to get out of fear and get out of faith, or get into faith. We need to get out of hatred and get into love. We need to get out of all this stress and anxiety and into the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's there for us. There really is nothing to fear if we just open our eyes and look and ponder these things and do a little bit of study and come to reason and understand. This world isn't the real world. This is like a little simulation that we're living in. The real world, the spiritual world, the infinite spiritual world created by God is the real world, and we're part of that now. We're part of God. We're those little points of light that is God expressing himself in individual souls. We're not separate from God. And it's not blasphemous to say that we are one and part of God, because we are. If it is true what the Bible says, we are his children, we are his offspring, we are his creation, we are created in his image and likeness, then it's pretty safe to say that, yeah, we're a part of that ultimate creator. We're not something he just burped up out of nowhere and then fled off into the heavens and sat down on his throne and said, well, let's see how they get along without me. I never thought that was true, and I never will. But a lot of people do believe that, and we need to change the perspective. We need to change how we are viewing this universe, this spiritual universe, this material universe around us. What is greater? Cancer? The flu? Arthritis? Heart disease? Economies? Whatever the case may be? Or is it God? Do you really believe that divine love and divine power can and will overcome any of those things that we face in our life if we just have the faith, if we can just rise in consciousness and get to that place where we know we are well looked after? And that is an interesting question we all need to ask ourselves. Because really, when it comes right down to it, there is nothing ever to fear. I thank you all for listening today. I hope you got something positive out of this podcast. I really did enjoy doing it. If you like this work and want to support the podcast, please see down below wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. My Patreon link is below. My Angel Thoughts Metaphysical page is below, and also my email if you want to contact me for any reason. Or you can listen to the podcast on Anchor.com and support the podcast through Anchor. I really appreciate you guys listening. I'm Paul James Caiden, and I'll see you next time here on the Spirit Side.